liked our tweet.
No, I retweeted it.
Oh, what are we? Are we live?
I think we are live.
Okay, let's lock this production down. Hit the recording. This is the first show back from NAB, guys. So if we're a little rusty, I don't know. Whatever. All right.
Whatever, man.
5, 4, 3, 2. Hello and welcome back to another exciting episode of DSLR FILM NOOB Podcast. Devin joins me back from New York, and we are both back from Vegas. An interesting, exciting visit to the National Association of Broadcasters, NAB. If you're not familiar with it, Devin, sir, what have you been up to this week since we last talked?
Well, I know right after NAB, which I got a little bit sick going out of NAB. I got home. I managed to recover in 2 days or so, and I went back out to New York for a small edit gig out there where they wanted something done the day of. It's very unusual for me to get called out to be, hey, we want you to edit on location, but it was kind of a team building event, and at the end of the event, they kind of wanted a cool video to show everybody how much fun they had during the event, big smiles all around. So that's why they brought me out there. So I actually, with DJ's help, bought an edit laptop just for that purpose. I mean, I've needed one for a long time. This is finally the excuse to cause me to pull the trigger.
Yet you managed to edit on my laptop the entire show.
Well, in specs, the two laptops were relatively close to each other. The only difference is his was bigger, and it was
one more time.
You bastard! But I prefer a 14-inch laptop. I like being able to work on a plane, depending on the plane. Obviously, if you fly Spirit, you're lucky if you have enough room, where your elbows don't touch each other as you try to eat your food. But and DJ's laptop already had all the content we needed on it and everything else, and all of his personal settings. And I didn't want to sit there and ruffle any feathers by using my own equipment. But it was, but still, it was. I had an absolute blast, and I finally got back here, and I'm catching up on emails and everything else. And it's still been busy for me coming back here, but. Hopefully soon I'll be back on track with making some videos and getting some stuff done. Like DJ's been over there powering through reviews lately. I think he did 3 review videos in a week. Is that
5? I think is actually 5? What I turned out this month or this week. It's basically, guys.
Compared to what? Once a month, I think.
Yes, once a month. I've actually piled a lot of stuff is piled up in the studio for review. So trying to knock those out as fast as they come. And I've got some more stuff coming in from Small Rig and so on that will be passing by my desk. Also, I've got these really interesting lights from Photo Diox. They're called the Flapjack. Hold on, let me cut to it here. And it's this round light right here. If you guys can see this with this extra camera right here. They're pretty nice. They're edgelit LEDs. I just did that review on the other edgelit LED, the Best Light VPad 150. And the price difference compared to the quality of these two is pretty interesting. The Flapjack is somewhere in the range of $240 for the bicolor version, and the VPad 150 is somewhere in the range of $40 for the bicolor version. So, man, they put out very similar amounts of light. Obviously the Flapjack's a bit brighter, but for the price difference, you could afford to buy half a dozen or more of the VPad Pros versus the Flapjack. So
but didn't we agree that the Flapjack was significantly brighter? I mean, now that you have both of them side by side.
Yeah, so the Best Light is turned all the way up right now, and I'm looking at both of these. Cut back to my camera so you guys can see this. But basically, this guy is all the way up right now, and that's about the brightness it's putting out. The Flapjack, on the other hand, is up about 3/4 to half brightness. So that's the difference between these two. It is significantly brighter, but you could put 2 or 3 of these VPad 150s in place of that for half or less the price.
Sure. I will say that I like the form factor, the size of the long square for the Best Light, because for me, that fits into a bag really easily while still kind of having a big area of coverage. So it's kind of like a nice, in-between road of both, hey, I want a softbox kind of look without bringing a giant 1x1 that doesn't fit in a photography backpack in most cases.
Now, this show is going to be a little bit different from our normal show. I'm going to hit the news button right now just because I'm familiar with that. But I think we're just basically going to cover most of what we saw at NAB, a few things we didn't manage to talk about, and a few things that we weren't as excited about, but a lot of you guys wanted to know our opinions on. So let's go ahead and move on to the news. The news. The first thing is the one thing that everybody seemed to be excited about except for us, and that is the Blackmagic Video Assist 4K. This is a recorder / monitor that will set you back around $895. The monitor will be out shortly. We were not able to really play around with it much at NAB. They had it kind of behind glass for the most part. But Devin, we kind of sparked some arguments here because I was excited about that Lilliput Q5 monitor that had a beautiful screen. And I was less excited about this, but many people said, why not get a recorder instead of a dedicated monitor? What do you think about that?
I think in general, yeah, I think Blackmagic has these at very competitive prices compared to even just field monitors on the market. But I have seen the Video Assist 5-inch working in person. I've touched and worked with one, as well as things like the small HD monitors, which sometimes run a lot more expensive than the Video Assist does. And I have to say, like, the screen isn't fantastic. Sure, you are getting 1080p. I can pull focus on it, but it's not the brightest screen I've seen, and it doesn't have the best color. And let's be honest, it's come a long way. If you remember, when the Video Assist first came out, like, there was no focus peaking, there was no punch in, there was no waveforms. It lacked so many features that monitors still had a lot more features in terms of what you got for actually shooting and getting the job done. Since then, they've brought in zebras. They've brought in a lot of features that a lot of people have asked for, triggered recording and all kinds of stuff like that. But in general, I think you're losing a little bit in screen quality in order to get those other features. Now, for a lot of people, I think that they care more about those features, so I can understand them wanting that. External recording is one of those things that fits into some workflows and doesn't into others, as well as the ability to cross-convert between SDI and HDMI. There aren't many monitors that'll do that, though DJ's Q5 is capable of that. So that's one of those nice features too. Though I know DJ rarely delves into the SDI workflow, having those options available can really help to, in case something comes up and you need to make something work.
Well, one of the things I wanted to point out to a few of you that were asking why not just go with the Blackmagic Video Assist versus a monitor. The monitor on the Blackmagic Video Assist isn't spectacular. And if you look at something like the small HD monitor panels, or even that new Lilliput monitor, or iCan's monitors, they have really nice screens. Yeah, they put out a ton of light. They're very bright. They have very good contrast ratios. In general, they have all the focus peaking nailed down. They have your zebra patterns. Everything you need out of a professional monitor is there. And you do spend a little bit. I think that Q5 and Q7 are going to be in the $500 price range. So that's more expensive than the $495 I think you pay for the 5-inch Video Assist, and not too far away from the price of the Video Assist 7-inch 4K version, which is $895, I believe. So you're close, but really those are monitors second and recorders first. So if you need to record and you also happen to just want something to frame with, then go with the Blackmagic Video Assist. But if you want to actually have a beautiful monitor that's very petite and fits into a tiny package, a small HD panel, or a Q5 from Lilliput, or the iCan monitors, or even some of the Marshalls that were out there this year, are all gorgeous monitors, but that's all they are. They're monitors. And if you want a really nice monitor, like for me, for example, I have the A7S, and Devin can attest to this.
Absolutely.
The back screen on this guy is horrendous. It's not good at all. It's hard to tell if anything's in focus. It's hard to check stuff. It's just not that great.
Well, and it's hard enough to focus a 4K sensor, because keep in mind too that once you step up from 1080p to 4K, your focus needs to be that much better. It's hard enough doing 4K on a good monitor, and then trying to do it on the back of an A7S II is just a nightmare.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for me personally, I just want a really sharp 1080p screen that's about 5 inches, small enough to fit into a bag and be in a tiny space. And I want a crisp, clean image with which to maybe punch in on or whatever to focus stuff. And yes, I know I can punch in on the A7S screen as well, but for me, that's what I want. I don't really need an external recorder. Now, if you need ProRes or some of these other things, still the recorder wins. And if you want a good screen and a recorder, spend a little bit more and look at the Ninja or the Atomos Blade or one of the other 4K products that they offer. Those are even clunkier than either of these two options that we talked about, but they do, for the most part, and Devin, you can attest to this, you saw them at the show, have beautiful freaking screens, right? Those are gorgeous.
And you pay for it. I mean, that's part of it, is that they're still very well priced when you consider them against maybe your top shelf, like your Marshalls and stuff like that. They're still competitively priced for that, but what you're paying for is both a great monitor and a recorder. Where in the Blackmagic camp, I really feel like you're paying for a recorder, and they put probably like a TFN screen or something like that in there. I doubt, from the only spec I got out of it was like viewing angle, and the viewing angle made me think it wasn't an IPS display that they were throwing in there.
It's like 45 degrees or something, isn't it?
I think it's a little bigger than that, maybe like 60 or 80 degrees. But it was narrow enough that it wasn't advertising the usual IPS, which is usually somewhere around 130 to 160 maybe degrees. So it's one of those that makes me think that, and I've seen it enough that I go, the screen isn't brilliant. Yeah, at least you got 1080p and focus peaking and things like that in the punch, and you get a few features, but it really is a budget recording and monitor solution. So if you go with, like he's saying, like the Q5, when we saw that in person, we were both blown away by how great it looked. It depends on how you want to spend your money. And if you want the best of everything, then you get something like a Atomos or something like that, where you spend a good deal of money, but you do get a brilliant looking screen and a good recorder as well.
Interestingly, we met up with the Small HD guy, and we're talking to him. And when he asked about what I was excited about, the Q5 was one of the first things I mentioned. I did not mean to punch him in the face. And my comparison was actually that the monitor looked almost as good as the 501 and 502 from Small HD. And that kind of brought him up and made him a little bit happier. But that's actually what I like about it, is it's small form factor, and it's not quite as expensive. And the screen, to me, looked almost as good, if not as good, as the Small HD offerings for the 501 and 502. Now, the 501, 502 are definitely thinner and more petite.
Oh, yeah.
And they're built with a lot more design thought into them. It's a cast piece of aluminum on the back, and they're really solid build and excellent monitors. But the Q5 was just good enough in a form factor that was reminiscent of the the Small HD DP6 and DP4 models, which aren't, the most clever designs, but were great for the time. And it's good enough for a savings of what, $500 or $600, $400, something like that. I think the 501's $899, and they were expecting around a $500 price tag on the Q5. So $300. I mean,
and it's a different section of features when you compare something like the 501 to the Q5, because if all you care about is like DJ, you care about that great image in a small form factor, then you're going to go with the cheaper of the two options. What the 501 does provide, and part of the reason for it being 40-30% more expensive, is the fact that, one, they have a loop system. I haven't heard necessarily fantastic things about their loop system, but they do use a loop in a way that it's very small profile. It sits next to the camera very nicely. Take it from somebody who has a 4-inch monitor with a loop on it that takes up a lot of space next to the camera. Things like that are really great to have as well. For people who are a part of that world, you can put LUTs into this monitor and flip through them and use them for shooting. And me and DJ aren't people who typically are recording log style, but if you do log every single day, having a monitor that you can put LUTs into is huge. And I think that's something else that the Video Assist doesn't seem to have right now, is an ability to pull in 2D or 3D LUTs.
All right, we've beat the monitor topic down hard enough for today. Let's go ahead and move on to this thing right here. This is the Apature DEC LensRegain, which is basically a new version of the original Apature DEC controller. It allows you to basically mount a Canon lens to a M4 III body and control the lens, but this one also has a focal reducer in it that gives you a 0.75 magnification on your lens so that you are getting close to APS-C on your GH4 body. And you also have remote control options to fire the camera, to start, stop recording, to change focus points, and so on. Apparently, Devin and I walked right past this. I saw it out of the corner of my eye and thought it was last year's model and didn't even realize that they had added the focal reducer. Now, the kicker here is actually the price. This thing will set you back about $599, which is about $50 less than the cost of a speed booster from Metabones. So you're getting a 0.75 reduction as opposed to a 0.71 reduction, but you're saving $50 and you're getting some extra features. Devin, what do you think about this controller? Would this be something you'd want for your GH3 or GH4?
You know what? Definitely, or even
Super
more
sexy,
so.
Right?
Yeah, and the Blackmagic Pocket camera too. Because remember, I got one of those, and that always needs a speed booster. If you don't want to be shooting at 200 millimeters effectively. What I'm curious about is it only works with the wireless remote, right? It's not like this is going to do the autofocus through the camera body.
It's electronic control, so you can turn off the wireless system and just use it directly through the body, I believe.
Okay. How well did their last one work in terms of focus speed? Because I know Metabones has made leaps and bounds in their speed of focus on like the GH4 bodies and other bodies. But what about Apature? Because I've never actually used one of their focal reducers.
I think this is actually more about focus control as opposed to autofocus. So the unit itself will give you A/B focus points that you can change, and you can manually adjust focus via the slider wheel that's on the front of the unit. It does disable the controls on wrong camera. It does disable some of the controls on the camera itself. I believe the iris controls are disabled when this thing is turned on. So if you want to adjust your aperture, you're out of luck at the camera body, but you have to do it with the controller. Now, I could be getting this wrong because it's been a while since I've messed around with one of these, but to me, for the price, I would be using this for mostly control and filmmaking. I mean, you put a wireless monitor or a wired monitor with this, you pull focus to get your subject, and then you hit record, and you can have your camera up on a gimbal or over on a small crane of some kind, or hidden up in the corner.
I would love to see how well, because that rocker looks like it's like a digital variable, like potentiometer or something like that. Like it has variable speed to it, depending on how hard you push it. And if that's the case, then if this thing can move the focus both very quickly and very slowly without messing around with settings, to me, that's a total winner, because there's so many uses I could have for a system like that. Not just creating a very cheap and affordable wireless focus system for a focus puller, but as well just in usually how I rig up the camera and stuff like that. I don't know, this kind of replaces having a follow focus wheel on the side of your cage, and it makes everything compact and clean because you're not even externally motorizing the focus, because it's using the motors inside of the lenses, which I think, barring that it all works great, that's the most ideal way to do it, because the motors will be quiet and you don't have to worry about powering the motors, and you get like the wireless features and everything else. So I'm super, super interested in this. I would love to check it out.
I posted a full review of this, not my review, another YouTuber's review, but I've got a link in the show notes so you can check that out. It's basically going through the entire adapter and all the controls and all the issues that go along with that. So check that out in the show notes here, and make sure you watch the video because it's a really interesting option if you don't want to spend the money on a speed booster. Now, another really interesting thing Devin and I came across at NAB that we didn't have time to talk about was this a 5-axis gimbal. This is the Nebula 4200, and it basically incorporates a 3-axis motor-controlled gimbal with a set of springs. And this was actually a pretty common occurrence at NAB this year. We saw a lot of spring/motor control systems. This one basically uses 2 handles with 2 spring controllers, and then your gimbal on top of that to stabilize all 5 axes. The image quality on this looked really good when we were messing around with it at NAB, and the price is significantly better than I was expecting. $899 I think was the showroom floor special, and $999 is the standard retail price, though I've seen it a little bit cheaper than that on eBay. What do you think about 5-axis image stabilization? Does this basically finish up the whole handheld gimbal system and make it completely usable without any issue?
Well, I mean, that's what Nebula is known for, right? Is the let's get a gimbal in the size of a handle, so it's easy to use. It doesn't weigh a lot. You can kind of run around with it all day and not get fatigued. So I like what they've done here, which is, of course, you have to add a little bit of weight, but putting in that spring system, I probably would have liked to see more than just single springs. And what I mean by that is if you look at it like a Steadicam arm, they're usually using 2 springs in conjunction to dampen, not just kind of absorb. But still, in this case, it worked out super effectively. I was really impressed with how smooth the shots were. And it was still light enough that I'm like, I could see myself using this all the time. I appreciate the fact that they worked on kind of building the camera up above your hands, because we've seen so many gimbals with that handlebar configuration that hangs the camera low. And I hate that. And, you know, you can flip a lot of them around and do other things like that. But I'm like, I don't know. I rarely need to get shots that are below people's chins. So it depends on what works for you and your workflow. But this guy being able to handle both and seemingly seems to handle it pretty well. They had a significant amount of weight on there. I've had some of the smaller, cheaper Nebulas, and I've been very disappointed by how little weight that they're able to handle. But I think they fixed a lot of that. They put 32-bit controllers in a lot of their stuff now. I'm not a handheld gimbal expert, but for me, like the pricing, I'm like, wow, I'm kind of liking this more than a Ronin or something similar.
It's even better when they have a little bit of lens flare.
Of course.
What the hell?
That's yeah, exactly.
For those of you listening, the product shots, and you can check this out in the show notes. They have a Canon 5D Mark III on the Nebula 4200, and they have a giant lens flare coming out of the EOS label on the camera itself. It's pretty weird, pretty strange choice. I do like the price. I do like the stabilization and the fact that it can handle larger cameras, the reversibility. All of those things make this a pretty interesting option, and I'm guessing we'll see a lot of clones of this coming out over the next year. Another weird and strange item that we came across at NAB this year was actually a SSD cartridge system for CFast cards that allowed you to plug directly into your Ursa Mini 4.6K or 4K camera. Now, if you take a look at this here, this is actually from the show floor. Devin and I shot a little bit of footage of this. You can see that this has a 3D printed case. And I thought that was a little bit strange. So I started looking on B&H Photo, and I think, as far as I can tell, the final production version here also comes with a 3D printed case. You can see the 3D printing that's going on right here, and that's suspect via the lines on the deal itself. And then the hard drive adapters also, if you look here, their spacers are 3D printed. So this is almost, to me, someone's science project. We did talk to a few people that used it. It does work really well, and it looks pretty nice as far as an option for longer recording without paying the super expensive prices of CFast cards. Devin, what do you think about this adapter. Are you gonna build one?
I've got opinions.
You got opinions.
For one thing, yeah, I think for the price, it definitely feels like the build quality is not there on the outside. I will say that I shoved SSDs in and out of it when physically handling this, and the SSDs locked in really nice. Everything clicked well and was tight, and they explained that the room in the cage, in the slop, in the mechanics is for accompanying different thicknesses of SSDs, because there isn't really necessarily a standard. We've seen a lot of SSDs come out thinner than the standard that most drives are.
Well, the 7mm and the 9mm are fairly standard options.
Yeah. A lot of people fit into that, but I could see as well that I've seen some weird looking SSDs that end up being a little bit thicker. I think Intel makes some extreme ones that are thicker or something like that. But I digress. Here, you're right. It seems like a lot of simple electronics because there isn't much brains to it. This is kind of the way the protocol is made, so that your new CFast 2.0 cards are really SSD. Their SATA 3 is really what they're doing there.
SATA is what you're using for CFast.
So
previously it was PATA for the adapter for compact flash.
Right. And so here, to me, this is really kind of like a gender changer for an audio cable or something like that. They are providing extra power for it. So to use a system like this, you do need to have, which is why it works well for an Ursa Mini, because most of the time you're going to throw a V mount or a gold mount onto your Ursa Mini. So getting a D tap over to power this thing is a no-brainer. But for me, just the price seems a little too much for, I don't know, the kind of box it is and everything else. It's really hard for me to justify that price, knowing that I know the guts inside of it aren't going to be much more than maybe $100 at most, because there isn't really brains going on. So for people who are DIY like me, I'm pretty sure I'm just going to create something like this for myself if I go forward on an Ursa Mini, where there's some people who are not handy with soldering. They aren't into 3D printing at their local library or stuff like that, and they're just going to end up spending $600 for this adapter. But, you know, I don't know. I feel like there could be clones of this pretty soon because this isn't complicated stuff.
Well, and you got to be careful, too, if you're home brewing this. There's an easy way to accidentally fry a hard drive if you hook the power lead up to the wrong. That's
true. Don't make this your first DIY project to try to, you know, save a couple $100. It's not worth it if you're going to start frying, you know, $200 SSDs.
The other thing to note, and I talked to a shooter on the floor who was borrowing this and working with it all week at NAB. This is not necessarily compatible with all CFast applications. It depends, on the hatch that they use for the CFast cards. Mm-hmm. It also depends on formatting techniques and some of the other things. It does work with the Ursa Mini, but there are other cameras that it does not work with, and they were kind of gathering up a list of those that do and do not. So this is not a solution for every CFast application, but it is really interesting. And I love the fact that I could get a 1 terabyte SSD in there to record on, as opposed to a 128 gig CFast card for roughly the same price.
Even if you don't shoot RAW, you're at least going to be shooting ProRes on an Ursa Mini, right? So you're talking about gigantic files when you talk about 4K ProRes. It's obscenely huge. And so, for me, this is the only workflow where I would consider that, just because right now CFast is so small and so expensive.
Now, before we roll on to the next thing on the news list here, a lot of people were asking questions about the rig that Devin and I were using. And so I wanted to quickly I don't know if it'll be quickly, actually. I'm not gonna justify this. I'm just gonna say we're gonna talk about the camera gear that we shot on. And I've actually got this sitting right in front of me. My dog, of course, is going crazy here, trying to snuggle with me, which is very frustrating. But I've got the Sony a7S Mark II right here. And you can see that we have this rigged up with a single handle. Devin and I both prefer to have the camera handle there open, because it gives you all the controls and options to access the, whatever settings you want. I've got the handle here on the side, which gives you a really nice way to just carry it around. And then we rigged this up with the K1M audio adapter right here and a couple of wireless packs. We have the Saramonic over here on the side, and we were also using the Sennheiser G2 unit. The rig itself is fairly well balanced, pretty easy to hold on to, and most of the parts are from small rig with a NATO rail on the top and a NATO rail on the side. We also had this attached to a monopod for shooting. And the monopod itself made it very easy and quick to just run around and set up, shoot something really quick, and then move on. Now, Devin, this is your first round of shooting with the A7S Mark II. First of all, what do you think about the 5-axis image stabilization on this guy?
I was pretty impressed with it. I've always thought that internal stabilization that isn't done inside of the lens and it's done on the sensor level, I don't know. I always thought that like it was really good at either staying completely still and making an image that doesn't move, but it would fail terribly when you would try to do smooth pans and other things like that. That's why, you know, a lot of the cameras, the older cameras, if you remember the old mini DV cameras and stuff like that, you would turn off stabilization if you were on a tripod or a monopod, because the moment you try to pan, like it would fight you pretty hard, the stabilization in the lens. But here, it seemed to like understand that, and it worked very well between moving from a still shot into a moving shot and stabilizing the whole thing. So overall, I was pretty impressed with how the that 5-axis stabilization really worked. And I definitely think it was a little bit better than what we saw in the Olympus M5 Mark something, right?
The OMD 5 Mark II.
Yeah, in that one. Because that one, when I saw a lot of the footage, I wasn't super impressed with the way that it stabilized. But A7S II, I think that Sony's been working on internal stabilization for a while now, and I think they really nailed it on this one. That's just my opinion.
Now, the other camera that kind of impressed Devin a little bit, or at least I think so, I'll get Devin's opinion in just a second, was we both brought a bunch of kit with us, way more kit than we probably needed. And I ended up shooting most of the B-roll for NAB on my Panasonic LX100. And we had 2 GH4s sitting there that we could have used, but that was the camera I went for. Now, Devin, you did some of the editing on this footage as well as messed around with the LX100. What do you think about it as a B cam?
In this situation, I think it's
he really likes to say this situation.
Yeah, because there's times where I go, no, I wouldn't want to shoot with that. But since we are trying to move so light, I think that our kit really worked out well, because that cage that he showed you with the handle on it, it's like that cage is strong enough, the handle's strong enough that we could just keep the monopod attached and carry the entire rig and monopod / tripod by that handle, because we had a light tripod too. We aren't running around some giant Manfrotto thing. So keep that in mind. But I think that worked out well. So I could carry the entire rig with one hand if I needed to pick up and move real quick, which can happen sometimes. And then him just having the second camera in his pocket that's super small and convenient, and he can just pull out, turn on, and like the lens cap opens up and he starts shooting. I was really impressed with it. I mean, it's a little disappointing that it's not easy to get audio into that camera. You know, there's some hacks and like physical things.
You have to actually drill a hole in it.
You could drill a hole in it if you really want to put audio. So I'm disappointed that there isn't great audio coming out of that camera, but its image stabilization for me seemed to be spot on. The lens on it is good. And I think just the fact that it is so compact for a rig like this, it's not like it's another rig we have to carry around. It was like you can pull it out of your pocket and hit record. And that was kind of cool to really do that and not have stabilization equipment and everything else to worry about with it. So what do you
think about the 4K image out of it?
Oh, I thought it looked as good as a GH4. I thought it was incredibly sharp, and you know, the noise was about where I expected for Panasonic at this point. So I don't know. I loved it.
Completely justified in my choice of the LX100 now.
Yeah, no, really. I think that it's a fantastic. I think what works for that camera is not building a rig around it and making it into a big thing. I think what works well for that camera, he added, you know, that small handle. He's shown it on the website before and things like that. I think just adding that and leaving it alone, it works as a great camera to grab a couple of shots. I think if you try to start adding a bunch of rigs and other crap to it, you overbuild it and you lose what makes that camera good, which is just the fact that it has a fixed lens on it, and that's okay because all you're going to do is pull out and hit record. So,
yeah, the macro feature is also pretty awesome.
Yeah, I was surprised how well that lens worked in macro mode for being a fixed lens. I think it looked fantastic.
Now, one other camera we saw before we move on to the rest of the stuff on the list is the Panasonic GX85. And one of the things that has been confusing basically about the literature on this guy is actually that it says 5-axis image stabilization, and then it usually has a caveat that says with lens. So we asked the rep, and we got to get our hands on this and actually figure out what the heck is going on, what they meant by that. And they said it's sort of a confusing misprint. Turns out the GX85 does have 5-axis image stabilization built into the body, and then you can get an extra axis of stabilization from the lens itself if your lens has image stabilization built in. So that's your 5-axis image stabilization plus your regular gravity run spinning device, IS in your lens itself. We messed around with the GX85, and to me it was very smooth. The 5-axis image stabilization was really good, and the camera was almost as tiny as the LX100 that we were shooting on as a B camera. Now, Devin, we had someone there actually with us kind of messing around with the camera and telling us what he thought. What did you think about the size and price offering? And do you think we'll see that as a key feature in the GH5?
Oh, definitely. I think it's absolutely certain that Panasonic is putting so much into this internal sensor stabilization, which is good because Sony obviously is interested in that too. And I think that it's kind of getting to that point where it's one of those things that mirrorless right now has over the DSLR market. Because we've talked a bit about Canon rumors about a new 5D and stuff like that. And one of the things that aren't on any rumors for any of the new DSLRs coming out is internal stabilization. And there's a lot of, I'm sure, reasons for that concerning mirrors and all kinds of stuff. But I think this is one thing where like it's another selling point for a mirrorless camera for video production as well as just photography, because I think it's in a way trying to compensate for stepping into a higher ISO and stuff like that for photography purposes. You can get a more stable image and run a longer shutter speed more easily. So I think that, yeah, this is going to end up in the GH5 for sure. I think it'll have internal image stabilization. Panasonic has said repeatedly that the GH5 or the next, they haven't announced it, but they say if we continue the GH line, that the next camera will be a very significant improvement, and it will not just be a small improvement or reiteration of
6K.
and DJ's on his 6K train, and at this point he might not be wrong because they didn't announce at NAB. Because I always said if it's coming out at NAB to buy, the chances are we aren't going to see something crazy like 6K. But since it's going to be still a while until something shows up, I think current rumors put it at Q3 or Q4 of this year, that there's time that, that could be possible. I don't know how the codecs and the bit rates will work, but it could be possible. So I'm really excited, and I think the GX85 could be a really good B camera for that kind of situation.
My rumor actually, here's my conspiracy theory, guys. I'm going to lay it on you. I was shopping this idea around at NAB, and someone's probably already stolen it by now, but I believe that the 1DC or 1DX Mark II, is meant to be Canon's 4K offering for the foreseeable future into the end of this year. At that point, once they've sold as many of those as they can possibly get out the door, then around October, November of this year, they'll announce the 5D Mark IV, which will basically have the features from the 1DC. And be missing a few extra things. They'll cripple it in some way that is obvious to Canon, but not obvious to everybody else. And then at the same time, to sort of swoop in and steal the sunshine from the 5D Mark IV release, Panasonic will roll in casual Friday style with the GH5 and lay that down on the table and be like, bam, 6K, image stabilization, all the ISOs, and we are out. And then they'll walk out the door. That's my theory. I don't know if this is going to happen or not, but that's what I think is going on here. Devin, I've told this to a number of people. Reactions, what do you think? Most people thought that sounded like a pretty good idea.
No. And I think that there's definitely some merit to that. In a way, there's part of me that would be disappointed because I'd always hope to get a little bit better low light out of my Panasonic. And if they jump up a sensor size like that, I imagine that we'll just maintain the status quo, which isn't bad. You know, everyone's always like, oh, it's not a low light camera. And I'm like, why don't you film with like a mini DV camera and tell me it's not a low light camera? Like, but people forget how far the technology's gone and how, that bar has been raised over time. But if you're right and it's a bigger sensor, I don't think we're going to see better low light performance, but hopefully it won't be any worse in low light than what we currently have on the Panasonic line.
So squeeze a 20 megapixel sensor in there, which is probably about the limit as far as pixel count can go.
Oh, for sure.
In that size of body and image sensor. But I don't know, you can see there's still some ways to gain ISO out of that sensor, even at 20 megapixel. If you go with the BSD style backlit illuminated pixel sights, you go with the reversing of the film, the color separation plate back to the back of the unit instead of the front of the unit. You can get more light in that way. You can also do the thinner tracing on the chip itself. All these options are things that Sony is using in their sensors.
We know that Panasonic has that patent on using, for lack of a better term, because I'm not a scientist or engineer, but a prism type of Bayer pattern instead of using kind of colored gels, which those colored gels you're losing, almost, I think, like more than a stop of light in order to understand what color is in that pixel. And by switching over to a prism, it would technically remove that. So you're talking about gaining a stop or two of light by switching to that patented technology by Panasonic. Now, Panasonic, besides having the patent for it, hasn't announced using it or developing sensors for that technology yet, but that there are things that they can do to make those tiny sensors work even better. So I'm excited for it.
Now, let's talk about some clones here. This is a weird thing and kind of interesting as well. There's a couple of booths that Devin and I wandered by in the more seedy section of the Chinese market and NAB, and we found some stuff that looked really, really similar, if not identical, to name brand companies that were also on the showroom floor in other halls and other sections. This one right here is pretty interesting to me and to Devin, and this appears to be pretty much the same material and design as the Rocot Softy or Rycoat Softy, and this guy is, it feels the same, the texture is the same, the 3D air stopping system on the inside is pretty much identical, and it almost looks like this company that we bought these from on the showroom floor is selling the OEM version of the more expensive stuff that's out there. Devin, you got one, I bought one. These were $30. Have you tested it out yet? Have you given it a chance?
I haven't done my side-by-side test, but I can confirm that for the most part, it sounds pretty transparent. I need to put it under some real stress testing and some heavy wind. I did hear from a professional field recorder in terms, she actually had tried out the Rycoat version, the official brand, I guess you could say, of this technology. And she said, no, it didn't block all wind. In some really extreme instances, you can't beat that fur. But for everything else, I think also, too, to describe what this product is the reason why this exists and why one might use this over a fur cover is because without the fur, you don't have to worry about weather or matting or anything like that. It doesn't make your microphone waterproof, but it itself is waterproof. You can get it soaked. You can get mud on it. It's not going to screw up and get all matted down and make your mic sound worse. You can squeeze it out, throw it back on your mic, and be ready to rock and roll. So, and you're right. I think this is possibly the OEM manufacturer. Now, they did also, too, have longer versions of this than even Rycoat will produce. And they were some strange shapes. So I don't know if it's really an OEM. I don't know if it's a clone. I don't know if it...
I almost feel like they're the ones that came off of the assembly line, that they're like, that one's a little lopsided. Didn't meet our quality assurances. So
very well
throw that in the bucket over there.
It very well could be, because we've seen that. That is definitely...
Look at mine, and that's why I suspect it, because mine looks great on this side, but as you turn it around, right about there, it's got like a weird stitching issue in it. Same material. And in fact, right here, I have a full-fledged fuzzy, and this has the same wind-blocking material plus the fuzzy on the outside. Very good unit, the one I normally use when I don't have my blimp with me. But this guy right here, honestly, I think it's just factory defects that they're selling. So... still,
very well could be.
I'm guessing probably the same quality as the Rycott, but way less expensive if you're on a budget. I've got some links in the show notes. These are the T100, I believe, that I'm holding up here, and they have some smaller ones, some longer ones, the T180. They're kind of hard to find.
I got the T160. They are extremely hard to find right now, and we aren't sure why. We don't know if it's because they don't necessarily have permission to sell it, which could be an issue on the States. But
that was sort of a shifty transaction, buying it on the showroom floor. They're like, "Hey, you got cash?" And we're like, "Oh." They're like, "All right, come here." And then they go over to the table where they actually have their products. They like pick one off, grab it, and sell it to us right there.
But what is easy to find on even Amazon is Boya does have the furry version of these. So if you're not necessarily in or care about the whole, waterproofness or whether, you know what I'm saying. If you want the furry kind, I think you can find the Boyas are pretty inexpensive on Amazon already in several sizes. So,
yeah, and Micover, which is a company I've used for a long time for both my Rode video mic as well as furries, makes some excellent mid-priced ones. They're about $60 or $70 for the fuzzy / wind protecting innards. So both of those, all those, really good choices. Now, next thing on the show notes here is actually Lightmeters, and Devin and I both kind of drooled over some Lightmeters at the show, which is
like a couple of nerds.
A little bit weird, but there were some interesting offerings. And on top of Lightmeters, we also saw some spectrum analyzers that were capable of measuring the CRI and quality and flicker of LED lights. This one here is from ICANN. It's the CV600. And we've also got a few others linked here in the show notes. I think this is the, it starts with an S. What's the name of the company? Saycon or something. I think that's how you say it. It's Saycon.
Yeah.
Saycon makes light meters. They've made them for years, but they also make this pretty beautiful spectrum analyzer that will tell you the light output, the color temperature, the CRI, and everything else. The price at first blew us away at how expensive they were until we started actually looking at the price of this particular style of meter. And it turns out $1,400 is somewhat reasonable for a meter that has these capabilities. Devin, are you going to start using this as a professional tester for LED lights?
I would love to, but right now it's outside of my price point. I would love to just borrow one of these for a weekend so I can like dive into all my lights and record what they're actually doing instead of just working off of white sheets and specs from the manufacturer. Because I could totally nerd out on this stuff, like the quality of light and everything else, and what, being able to visually see it like that on a color screen to understand like, oh, this LED has a lot of green cast, and not just by looking through your camera, but also looking on the screen and seeing specifically where those shifts are on the magenta and the blues and everywhere else. That stuff I would just absolutely love. As well as, having basic, you can accurately measure light output and everything else. Unfortunately, yeah, this is how much they cost, because more or less this is scientific equipment. This is like buying a decent oscilloscope. The oscilloscopes are still expensive because the parts that go into them, if you want high resolution and you want really accurate results, you need really good quality components, and that costs money. So this is one of those where they cost money because they're quality components.
I'm looking on lensrental.com right now, and it looks like you can rent some of the lower price light meters. This is the flagship $300 model that Devin and I also really liked at NAB, and it's $44 for 5 days. So that part's nice. I would love for lensrentals.com to add another option for this expensive unit. In fact, I was doing the review of that VPad 150 earlier this week, and I was like, man, I'm looking at the image quality from the light source, and I don't see any casting with my own personal eyes, but how accurate is that really? Am I really seeing 93 CRI? I don't know. Maybe I am. Could this be 85 and they're just, writing a higher number to make me feel better? Could be.
Yeah, that could be too. I can say that between old LEDs and new LEDs, I can definitely usually see a bit of magenta cast. If it's something 85 or lower, I think it's pretty easy for the average person in a side-by-side viewing to see the difference. Yeah. But you're right. Once you get past that, I find it a hard time really distinguishing the quality of light. And it's hard to just use your camera to distinguish that quality of light, because each camera has kind of different color technology and color profiles in it. So some cameras may respond really strongly to a few frequencies that other cameras don't. And that's one of the reasons why these things are expensive, is because they're made so that all across the brand, if you could have two spectrometers from two different companies and they'll both give identical readings because they're both like accurately made. At least that's what you'd hope for. You'd hope that, you know, no matter which brand or what tool you go with, that your accuracy is always there and there's no weird like people throwing in their own color math and everything else. So that's why, yeah, I would love to have one of these and test out a bunch of lights, and I'd have a total field day with it.
Now, one more thing before we wrap up with a camera that we really liked. Let's talk about monopods and travel tripods for a second. After using the travel tripod that I've been basically in love with for the last, I would say 5 years, the Siri N1004, which is a really nice travel tripod, very solid. Devin was kind of having a little bit of issues. The legs were starting to come loose and the foam was starting to die on the thing. And I really have abused it. I decided to upgrade to a newer travel tripod. And this is the MePhoto Globetrotter carbon fiber travel tripod. Mine is actually gray. I don't know why the package describes it as green, but it's a few inches shorter than the Siri N1004, and it's a little bit beefier. It also includes a head in about the same weight package as the Siri, which does not include a head, but it is double the price. Price tag on this guy is $399 versus the Siri, which will set you back around $200. Still, it feels really nice, very lightweight, very solid, and it is quite a bit smaller and easier to pack up than my old unit. So I like this. Devin, you used my travel tripod the whole time we were there. What do you think about travel tripods in general? Because a lot of people try to use those as a video tripod, but obviously you don't have the fluid head or the smooth motion. Do you think you can live with that in a travel situation?
In most cases, no. I still bring a small Manfrotto head for doing some hydraulic moves. But in terms of the legs itself, I think in most cases it's good enough if you're running around with a small DSLR rig like we are. If you had bigger stuff, you're using an FS5 or something like that, then you also got to haul around bigger support equipment. But that's one of the kind of great parts of DSLR video making, is that if you do keep the package small and you keep it light, you can use a lighter support system like this. I would definitely would have appreciated, the carbon fiber on the legs, as well as, it being able to fold up and be a little bit smaller too. But for the most part, I don't know. I move the camera too much. I do too many pans and tilts for me to live without having some kind of a fluid head on there. But, and Manfrotto is not the only company, but there are lots of heads that are very small and you can get pretty decent movement out of if you're trying to be light on your feet.
Now, what about the image stabilization? I mean, was that allowing you to get more out of your pans and movement in your camera without having to have a fluid head?
Oh, for sure. I mean, like that's not ideal for me. If I want a pan has a kind of look to it, and that means I don't want to do a handheld pan. So I consider those to be two different looks, and depending on what you want to shoot, there's a reason to go with one over the other. But you're absolutely right. That internal stabilization with, taking your time and focusing on being smooth, you can actually pull out some really smooth pans out of it. They'll look different than if they are panned on a tripod for sure. But still, I think in terms of like smooth, clean looking video, it accomplishes that job if that's all you want.
Devin was actually making fun of me in the hotel room when I needed to get a quick crane style shot. I just held my arms out as far as they would go, set the focus at the lowest point, and then started from high to low and craned down onto the object. And he's like, that's not going to work. And then he looks at the image in post. He's like, dang it, that worked. Good job. All right.
Because I'm not used to your 5-axis stabilization. I didn't think it's come this far, but it really has. It's really become impressive.
Honestly, I'm a lazy filmmaker even before 5-axis image stabilization came about. I handheld all the time. on productions and on feature length shoots, I'll just run around with a monopod a lot of the times, or no monopod at all, and just handheld it. And you'll get a little bit of shake sometimes if you're not careful, but if you're aware of your surroundings and how you're walking and your moves, and you kind of practice a little bit in advance, the shake is to a minimum and it's not that annoying. Now with the built-in image stabilization, it's to the point where you can't even tell that I'm shaking, that there's any shake in it a lot of the times.
Yeah.
And it does such a good job that it saves me a lot of time and effort, as opposed to setting up stuff to just, handheld the shot. You don't have to run around with tripods. You don't have to run around with big fluid heads and so on. So I don't know. Maybe I should do it the right way, but until someone makes me, I am not going to. All right, last thing on the list before we get out of here, because Devin's got editing in about 25 minutes. The Kinefinity Terra 6K and 5K cameras. Now, Devin and I both had hands-on experience with this at NAB. They were kind enough to let us hang out at the booth, show us some test footage from the camera, actually have a monitor on the camera, a small HD monitor, and do some zooms and so on. This thing is a $5,000 to $6,000 base price tag unit, and it's the 5K for 5K and 6K for 6K promise. You do have to bulk this up with some extra attachments, including an XLR audio adapter, a monitor of some kind, and maybe a battery kit. But even the base model, right out of the chute, is capable of running basically by itself without any extra accessories. There's a 3.5 millimeter jack in order to put audio into this guy. It takes standard SSD drives, which is very refreshing. And of course, the price. This camera feels a lot like what we were expecting from Red many, many different times and did not quite get. Devin, what do you think about the Kinefinity Terra 6K and 5K cameras?
To be honest, I don't know. I feel like it's too good to be true.
You had your hands on it. It is definitely true.
I know, but it's really fascinating. You're right and wrong about bulking it up, and I think that's really the brilliance of this camera is yes, if you want to throw batteries on it, okay, if you want to throw a battery on it and have those XLR inputs, you are going to add an inch to the back of it, as well as having your SDI outputs. But at the same time, if you don't have the backpack, I guess you could call it, I don't know what it's technically called, if you don't have that add-on expansion part, it still has HDMI output that you can plug into a monitor to view what you're recording. It'll still have an internal drive. It still has a 3.5 millimeter jack, which means it can pull in audio from somewhere, whether that's an onboard mic, a wireless lav, or something like that. And while I would probably throw a handle on it, to me, that's not too bulky. It's maybe a little bit deeper than a 5D, but it's not bigger than a 5D, in my opinion. And so this kind of like, you can do the RAW with it. You can crank out high frame rates. If I recall right, the 5K has a global shutter option as well.
The 5K, that was a really innovative option they added to the 5K version. It has the capability of shooting on either a rolling shutter or a global shutter. So you are limited by dynamic range if you go with the global shutter versus the rolling shutter, and you do lose the high frame rates. But at the same time, that is a pretty impressive option and really versatile for a camera that's $5,000.
So if you consider you already have a monitor, well, you have several and you're looking at getting this Q5 now, but you already have a monitor that you can plug into the HDMI. Yes, you do have to work on a power solution, whether you throw some Sony MPs together or something like that to jack in to power it. But then after that, you have about all the connections and everything else you'd have with your normal DSLRs that you shoot with. You just need to add a monitor. That's like the one thing that lacks on the body by itself. And so you compare that to something like the Reds and everything else, you don't get that. It's like you have to buy all this extra stuff to make this little box work. And I love the fact that without anything added, the box already has audio and video output taken care of. So it's like the only things you need to add is a monitor, which both of us have, and a lot of video guys will have their own monitor, and you need to do power, which usually I'm running some kind of other power source for my cameras anyways because I demand super long hours. So So for me, I don't know. It's like it really seems like this brilliant thing that you can kind of build up and make it a really good run and gun camera, or you can build down and keep it in a really small package. So I'm super excited. I can't wait to see more from it. There's other features in there with wireless and all kinds of stuff too, which may make it even better if you're running it in such a small configuration. But I think for the most part, besides something like internal sensor stabilization or something like that, this thing is really impressive looking, being able to do ProRes, RAW. I think it also supports DNX HR. And I think the RAW, is the RAW their own codec, or is that a Cinema DNG with like a 3:1 or 2:1 compression?
I want to say they're using a Cinema DNG on this guy, but it's they're labeling it Kenny RAW, and
Kenny
they
RAW.
are
That's right.
adding something to it in order to make it easier to process and use. They did tell me that there was, I think, up to 4:1 compression on RAW, which is pretty nice.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, when Devin says the size of a DSLR, for those of you watching, like, he wasn't joking. This is an image right here of it from the side with the Movicam or Movcam handle on the top. And it was, width-wise was roughly the same size as a 5D Mark III, and depth, it probably only had about 1.5 inches or so of depth more than what you would get out of a 5D Mark III. And when we talk about accessories, I mean, this is all you're adding really to get the XLR jacks, and
Which isn't much.
a battery plate. And it also includes SDI outputs and so on. This plate only adds a couple of inches, and the accessories aren't crazy priced. Talking to the guys at the booth, they were expecting the XLR plate to be somewhere in the range of $500. So,
and consider what that does to the camera is that's like all the IO and power systems. Not only does it give you a V-mount option for powering it, but it's also giving you those XLRs. It's giving you more power taps, and it's giving you SDI out, as well as, I think, isn't it like it's got a gen lock or time code in as well or something like
yes,
that?
it does.
It's giving you all those pro features you're looking for, which is usually pro batteries, pro audio, and then pro video delivery.
And it provides a battery source as well. So if you're using your V-Lock batteries, you can output via the side port to, an XLR port of some kind on another device. The other thing it has in it, or in that package, if you want to go completely in the Kinefinity camp, is you can get a monitor that's designed specifically for this with mounts, and you can get the XLR adapter box. And that basically brings you up to a pretty decent DSLR size kit that's capable of shooting a ton of, it gives you all the features.
All the features, yeah. 200 FPS at 2K, 100 FPS at 4K.
Yeah, and the 5K version, or the 5K version with all that stuff will set you back about $6,100 or so. So compare that to what you'd spend right out of the chute for, say, a FS5 or FS7. I mean, there's a lot of freaking value here. And then the fact that it uses SSDs as your recording medium. Now, they did tell me right out of the chute that this is not a low light monster. The camera starts to break down if you get to ISOs above about 2000. So if you're trying to shoot low light, probably not going to be what you need. And I think he said if you switch over to the global shutter option, you lose a little bit of light as well, and it drops down to about 1600 ISO. And they had footage there at the booth of the camera shooting at both 1600 and 2000, and it looked very good. I mean, it was very respectable. The noise was fine grained and very small. It didn't crawl a lot. It didn't look hideous. I think you'd be fairly comfortable shooting at that higher ISO. I wouldn't go much past that because he did show me a little bit of the clips at 3200, and it was starting to fall apart a little bit, especially at 4K resolution. But still, man, that is really attractive. They are doing a really good job with the feature set on this guy.
Yeah, it's been nothing but impressive. I can't wait to get my hands on one to actually run around and shoot it. And like I said, I think its brilliance is being able to build it up or build it down, which is something that Red has always advertised, but Red's never had anything this small. So this really makes it, very fascinating.
This guy right here just won't leave my lap. This is Hero, my Pomeranian, by the way. Last thing I wanted to mention before we get out of here is actually the Saramonic guys. We stopped by their booth and talked to them. And one of the complaints I had about their wireless kit, the UW Mic 10, was actually that the receiver mixed the incoming channels, the left and right channels, together before it went out to your camera. And this is sort of frustrating because it gives you no control over the individual channels in post. So I mentioned that to them when I first tested out the very original release of the UW Mic 10 system, and they immediately got to work, updated the firmware, and about a month after I mentioned that, every unit that's been sold since has firmware version 2.0 or 2.1, which allows for stereo or mono separation of your tracks going out to your camera. So you can either mix them together if you prefer that, or separate them out if you prefer that, which is really good and very nice. Suddenly turning this thing into an ultra sexy 2-channel receiver system for under $400.
Well, did you hear what Sony just came out with?
Yeah. Okay. So Sony came out,
just
go ahead.
To the game. Sony's late to the game. They finally came out with a dual receiver for their UWP. Yeah, UWP system. So if you think about it, Saramonic was kind of the first to have that small of a UHF system with a dual receiver. I know we've seen other ones from Asden and everything else, but they've all been rather large bricks for their dual receiver systems. And so really impressive stuff by Saramonic, and obviously Sony sees that there's money there too, so they're developing their own.
And in fact, while we were there, a couple of guys were shooting on Sony UWP systems, and they're like, "Oh, are you making fun of Sony with that fake label on there?" I'm like, "No, this just looks really similar to the UWP." This is the dual channel receiver right here, and you can see how small this is. It's roughly the size of a Sennheiser G2 unit. It's really, really tiny. That UWP dual receiver that Devin was talking about, the price tag on that's going to be $1,000, and that's only for the receiver. It's not for any of the transmitters. So you're still going to have to spend another $600 if you want to use those transmitters. And then on top of that, it did have one weird, goofy feature, was a microphone input that would mix into one of the channels at the device itself. So if you wanted to run a lav mic into your receiver, you could technically get 3 channels of audio out of that and into your camera. So really weird, very expensive. And then on the other side, you have companies like Saramonic offering up this awesome dual channel receiver now that they've fixed that one. I can't believe how inexpensive that is. $249, I think, for the base receiver transmitter kit, and then an extra $120 or so for another receiver or another transmitter to go with the receiver. If you need a wireless lav solution, that's pretty much a no-brainer in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And Devin, you used it the whole show. What did you think of the audio quality?
I think it worked just as good as the G2. It was kind of interesting running with both. I thought that, maybe we'd see some dropouts happen or something like that, because after all, it's an inexpensive UHF system. But I was super impressed, even on the busy show floor with lots of UHF traffic flying around. We didn't have any issues. Not any that, the G2s would have failed in the same situation. So, because we ran both simultaneously on both of us, and I never had one dropout between either system. So right now, I haven't seen a failing point on it. So I consider it as good as a G2 system for half the price.
All right, guys. Well, I think it's about time to get out of here. Devin, do you have anything else before we wrap up the show?
No, send us any questions you have about the show, because there's probably still more that we could talk about that we see, because we did see a lot.
There's a ton of tiny little lighting solutions that I have on the way. That Aladdin we saw? I've got one of those coming, and I've also got that tiny iCan, the little baby light that had its own battery internally. One of those is going to be showing up on my doorstep soon. So,
can't wait to see that.
Yeah, well, great. Now I'm going to have a bunch of pocket lights. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. You can find the show on iTunes, SoundCloud, and anywhere audio podcasts are distributed. You can also watch it live on YouTube when we go live on Sundays and Fridays, usually early in the morning, Pacific Standard time, probably. I don't know. Anyway, I don't know what time we go live off, honestly. But thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Make sure you review, like, and subscribe, and tell your friends about it, because the more, the merrier. And leave your questions in the YouTube comments, because that helps us determine the direction of the show. We will see you next time on another episode of DSLR Film Noob Podcast. Man, that camera, it looks nice.
I know, man.
Looks so nice. If I could justify that, I would buy.
Well, and like, even though it's like, no, it's not a low light monster, I'm like, that's about as good as a GH4 does. Like, that's not bad, but that's about, a GH4. If you push it past 2000, it won't be pretty. So
definitely.
So I don't know. I've lived so long in that ISO range that I'm like, I feel like I'd be okay with it and enjoy all the extra features like huge frame rates and everything else.
Oh man, and then 6K, that even gives you warp stabilization on 4K, or 5K even gives you warp stabilization.
Well, as other visual effects. Anytime you're doing visual effects, more pixels equal better visual effects, because you'll have more data to work off of.
Man, imagine the rendering power it would take to warp stabilize a 5K image to a 4K image. You're probably talking like half a day for 30 minutes. 30 seconds, I mean.
Oh, I'm sure. That's one thing I wish Adobe would kind of update the way they do warp stabilization. Like, it works really well, but it's so, you can tell it's based on object tracking, and so therefore it gets really squirrely if things move around too much.
Yeah.
Where some of the other systems like YouTube, where it's using more scene tracking and everything else, I think the problem is they aren't doing enough camera tracking in their stabilization. And I think once they start doing camera tracking, it'll go faster and it'll look better.
Well, and we did see a few of those tracking boxes that aid in stabilization by finding the position in the world the camera is located at and tracking the shake and roll and all that crap.
Bringing that into post. And I still feel like that's kind of, if you expect to do a lot of motion, that's the cleanest way to fix it in post if you're going to do that. It seems like an expensive option to be like, why not just get a stabilization system? But I guess if you're in a situation where you can't use a stabilization system, that's the next best thing, because it does work really well. We saw them for GoPro and on bigger cameras, and it does work well.
Oh man, I forgot to mention that. Remember that GoPro sync
time
back?
code syncing thing?
Yeah. Pretty sweet too. All right, there's so many things that Devin and I could have talked about. This is the end of the show. I'll let Devin get back to his things, and I've got this lady here that is hounding me to go outside, so I'm gonna go enjoy the 80-degree weather in Portland for whatever reason. All right, take care.